All right. Hi, everyone. Hope you're staying warm out there. Got blue skies in Ithaca, but maybe not all over the place in the region yet. Let's see. A few more coming in. Okay. Great. Looks like some good turnout. So I'm going to start the program. Welcome again. My name is Liz Kreidinger. I'm the steward and director of the Cuba Lake Watershed Network. I see a lot of familiar faces, but definitely some new ones. We are a regional not-for-profit dedicated to the stewardship of Cuba Lake and its watershed, but are really excited also to see so many regional partners signing onto this call from the Finger Lakes and wider out in New York State. So thanks for joining us today. I'm only going to speak very briefly here at the beginning to take care of a little business, which is just a quick welcome and introduction. That introduction's to our host for today, who is Sarah Eckel. Sarah Eckel is Cuba Lake Watershed Network's new Director of Community Engagement. So I'm very excited to be introducing her to you all today. And she's going to be leading and hosting this program with our speaker. So with that, just to let you know for housekeeping, we are recording the talk today, but we'll be turning the talk off when it comes to Q&A later, so we can just have some discussion together at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Eckel. I am Cayuga Lake Watershed Network's Director of Community Engagement. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Liz went over the format. And as we're moving along, if you do have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll work to address them as we're moving forward. I want to introduce our speaker. Thank you so much to Brian Smith. He's the Associate Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. CCE is a statewide nonprofit. They've been working to protect New York's environment for more than 30 years. Is that right, Brian?
Actually, just at our 40th
Oh,
birthday.
40 years. All right.
Yes.
Brian brings more than 20 years of environmental advocacy experience at the local, state, regional, and federal level. He's worked on a wide range of issues around the Great Lakes, clean water, green jobs in New York. He's worked on the Environmental Protection Fund, and most recently, it's moved to $425 million. And he's worked on toxics cleanup in and around the Great Lakes Basin and New York State as well. He's going to give us an overview of funding and priorities in Albany and also in DC, especially with a focus on our priorities as a Finger Lakes region as a part of the Great Lakes Basin. So thank you, Brian, and we'll let you get started.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much, Sarah and Liz, for having me and everybody for joining. Really appreciate it and all the great work that you guys do. And as Sarah said, my name is Brian Smith. Been with the organization now, I think for 24 years. And we work, as Sarah said, on local, state, federal policy and really on a broad range of issues. Certainly water is at the forefront, but work quite a bit on clean energy, toxics, open space protection, pretty comprehensive. And our organization, if you're not familiar, we're statewide. I'm over in Buffalo, but we have members throughout central New York. We have office in Albany, and we actually began down on Long Island. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about predominantly about New York State, just giving a brief overview of kind of the state of play of environmental funding, in particular clean water funding, and what our priorities are, some of the big priorities in New York State. And we do have the benefit of the fact that the governor just last week released her executive budget proposal, so we can kind of provide an update on that and our perspective and my perspective on from the environmental community on how we see that and any changes or adjustments that we think should be made in the budget process that ends in April 1st. So I'll start it off talking a bit about water and water infrastructure funding. And our work in this goes back many, many years, but the New York Clean Water Coalition, I want to talk a little bit about, started about 9 years ago with my organization, kind of kicked it off. And something I'm really proud of because recognizing the significant challenges we face with clean water in New York State, particularly with our infrastructure. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I think folks know our wastewater infrastructure is aging and failing. We have systems that are 100 plus years old. Same with the drinking water infrastructure. We have sewage overflows that are overflowing into waterways. We have, drinking water mains that are breaking. In this cold weather that we're dealing with right now, I think we see, water main breaks on a daily basis. So it was that long-term issue of aging and failing water infrastructure coupled with some really high-profile cases of water pollution, like you think Hoosick Falls, PFAS, and Hoosick Falls and Newburgh, that really got us going as a coalition, not just with the environmental community, but we're successful in bringing in the New York Water Environment Association and the American Water Works Association, so the wastewater treatment operators and the drinking water suppliers and the environmental community, all getting together and developing a shared platform on what we think needs to happen to protect clean water in New York State. And so that process started up about a decade ago with the organizations that you see listed here. And the big victory we had in the beginning was the adoption in New York State of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act in 2017. And this policy, if you're not familiar, is really a comprehensive approach to protecting water in New York State, from its source all the way to our taps. As you can see here, there's a number of things that the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, which was initially funded at $2.5 billion over a 5-year period, is all about, as I said before, replacing those aging water mains, replacing antiquated septics and cesspool systems that we have in a number of areas and throughout the state, cutting down on sewage overflows, installing, treatment technology on drinking water to remove PFAS and 1,4-dioxane and other emerging chemicals of concern, but also going out and protecting water at its source, protecting and conserving land that is critical to protecting water. The state has been purchasing land for that purpose, remediating toxic sites that may potentially pollute or are already polluting and contaminating drinking water sources, replacing lead pipes. Just last year, there was a new category put in because, unfortunately, a lot of our focus, especially when it comes to emerging contaminants, is focused on, public water systems, very importantly, but private wells throughout the state are not included in our drinking water standards. So, unfortunately, there's been a lot of instances of private wells contaminated with PFAS and other emerging contaminants, and it's an expensive problem for homeowners to have to deal with. So there's a new program that will help with testing and treatment of private wells that are contaminated with emerging contaminants, and something we strongly supported and will continue to support in this year and the years ahead. And this isn't even the full list of programs that are supported. There's, programs and funding to deal with road salt, pollution runoff from farms, including CAFOs, green infrastructure, and others. So again, you get the idea that I'm a big fan of this policy, and it's been a huge success in the last, 9 or so years. What have we seen? $6 billion has been appropriated since 2017 from the governor of the New York State legislature into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. And I will say, I don't have the specific numbers on other states, but I can tell you that New York State is by far leading the nation in investing in clean water through this program with a $6 billion investment. That's translated into about over 2,600 clean water projects that have been funded thus far. And about 63% of those funds are benefiting disadvantaged communities. We know that, oftentimes, the clean water challenges that disadvantaged communities face are significant, and communities might not have the resources to address those problems. But this funding, and often coming in the form of grants, helps those communities move forward with important clean water projects. So a great success. As I said, $6 billion, but in leading the nation. But of course, there's always a but. Um, when it comes to our overall need for wastewater and drinking water infrastructure in New York State, unfortunately, $6 billion, while fantastic, is really a drop in the bucket of what's needed. According to the EPA's latest analysis, New York State has about a $90 billion need to upgrade our wastewater and drinking water infrastructure. On the wastewater side, it's about 54 billion, and the drinking water side, it's about 35 billion. So, despite the significant progress, the major investments we've made, we still have a long, long ways to go to address that massive $90 billion need. And it's not only the big overall need that we have that is a concern. Despite the fact that we're investing, $500 million a year in recent years in the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, we're not meeting the need that's out there throughout New York State. The program is extremely popular, understandably so, for all the needs that we have, and it is consistently and significantly oversubscribed with local governments looking to get more of this funding. You can see in 2024 and 2025, the 500 million that was allocated versus what was actually requested. In 2025 alone, there were 205 shovel-ready projects that submitted for funding. They were requesting $685 million that unfortunately did not receive funding. And it's not because they weren't worthy of getting funded. These were programs projects to replace lead drinking water pipes, to install treatment technology to remove emerging contaminants and things like that. But unfortunately, there's only so much funding to go around, and these projects did not get funding in 2025. So we have an overall massive need. We have oversubscription of the current program on a year-to-year basis. So there we go. So we, obviously have a lot more long way to go. And when I mentioned that $90 billion number, it doesn't even include some new challenges. And I'll go through a few of those. The first is lead service line replacement. We have about over 500 by the estimates that we have, about 550,000 lead service lines throughout New York State. And as per EPA regulations to the lead and copper rule regulations, we need to replace all of our lead pipes by the year 2037. So in about 10 years, we're going to have to replace 550,000 plus lead drinking water pipes. Now, and I mentioned that this is something that we as an organization strongly support. There is no safe level of exposure to lead, and that is particularly true for pregnant women, children, and the immunocompromised. So we think it's really essential that we do this, but we also have to recognize that it comes at a very, very, very high cost. When you do the math on that, at 500,000 plus lead service lines at 10,000 apiece, we're looking at $5 billion or $500 million every single year. So that alone could, unfortunately, can eat up all of the funding in the Clean Water Infrastructure Act if we put it all to that to get it done in time. So a significant challenge. Important that we do it and we meet the requirements of EPA, but it's going to come at a significant cost. Another significant challenge is the drinking water standards for PFAS, known as maximum contaminant levels that EPA adopted. Again, another one that we strongly support. The science on PFAS is very, very clear that has significant adverse health impacts, and we need to get it out. There's really no safe level of exposure to PFAS in drinking water. EPA has a target of 0 for for that because it's a carcinogen. So we support strengthening the standards for PFAS in drinking water. EPA proposed bringing down, New York already has a drinking water standard for two of the PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS at 10 parts per trillion. What the EPA regulations, which were done under Biden, would do is bring that down to 4 parts per trillion, which is more, pushing it to what's technically and feasibly achievable to protect public health as much as possible. But what that would mean for New York State implementing that would mean that about 400 between those two standards, and there's a couple other PFAS chemicals covered by the EPA regulations. EPA is looking at rolling those back under this administration, but as of now, they're still in place. But would mean that about 425 utilities would have to install new treatment technology. And that comes at a significant cost to each and every one of those communities. And when we look at where we're finding PFAS throughout New York State, it's typically, according to the drinking water suppliers that we've communicated with, that 97% of those violations occur in smaller systems that serve less than 3,300 people. And when you have smaller systems, you have smaller communities with less resources, and it's even more difficult with the rate base that they have to be able to pay for the treatment technology necessary to remove them. Another challenge is energy costs. We hear about this everywhere in our lives, whether, and we think about it in terms of how it impacts businesses, how it impacts residences, how energy costs are increasing significantly in New York State, but throughout the country. But this is a major issue for, our water utilities as well, for wastewater and drinking water utilities. Energy required to move water from the source to the treatment to tap is very, very energy intensive. So they'd use a whole lot of juice, and those costs are going up. We did speak with one utility in upstate that is facing an increase in their energy costs of just 4/10 of a cents per kilowatt, 4 cents per kilowatt increase, which would translate into a $2 million increase in their operating costs in this year. So you just tack that on to all the other mandates and other issues they're dealing with. Increased energy costs just add to the regular operations and management. So significant new challenges that really just add on to that $90 billion need. So that's kind of the background. And so where are we at right now in New York State with the budget process? As I said before, the governor did release her executive budget proposal last week, and it had some very good news. There was $750 million for water infrastructure, and that was part of a 5-year commitment of $3.75 billion. So that $750 million over the course of 5 years as a significant long-term investment in clean water infrastructure. Great news. 500 million of that is for the traditional Clean Water Infrastructure Act, which the program that I've been speaking about. And I'll just say too that going into this year, and I'm sure folks are very familiar with this, when we look back to last fall, kind of the outlook for the New York State budget was pretty dismal, particularly related, due to the fact that a lot of the federal cuts that we're dealing with from different things that this federal government is doing, and the impacts, the trickle down effect that's having on New York State would kind of have really a devastating impact on New York State's budget. So we kind of brace ourselves for potentially a significant cut to this program. But as things moved along and actually some things in New York State improved, the economic outlook looked a little bit better. Still think we're going to deal with some significant budget shortfalls in the years ahead. But at least for 2026, the impact of some of these federal cuts weren't as significant as we had feared. And that's kind of the backdrop that, we initially thought 500 million would be the best possible scenario. But, with the improved conditions, the governor did propose an additional 250 million. That $250 million is where it gets a little tricky and where we're still kind of, analyzing and looking and asking questions and looking for more clarification. So this additional $250 million for housing-related infrastructure is broken down into two categories. One is for $200 million, which would go to housing, water infrastructure related to housing, preservation and development. And the other 50 million would go to uh, water infrastructure related to housing preservation in rural areas. And that's really, there's not really much more to it in the state, but in the budget language than what I just said. So the language is really, really vague. And we have significant concerns, especially as it relates to the $200 million that would go for housing development in all regions of the state, that this is something that could potentially just subsidize developers to move forward with unsustainable or sprawl development that goes into green spaces and then ultimately adversely impacts the water resources that we're working to protect. So there's some concerns there. Our initial feedback and a number of organizations, including mine, are testifying today at the Senate and Assembly budget hearing. We're looking for a couple things on that $250 million. Is one, there's a demonstrated need, as I said before, $90 billion with existing need that we have in New York State. We think that if there's additional resources, at least some of that $250 million, excuse me, should be shifted back into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act to address those needs. And if there are, and I certainly think there are justifiable uses of housing, of funding for housing related water infrastructure, that we have more clarity, more guardrails to ensure that we're, really focusing on things like, redevelopment in our city centers and areas that already have development. We're not encroaching on green space or subsidizing sprawl. Um, and that's the focus. So it's a shift in funding and providing more guardrails and more clarity into what exactly that funding would go to. That's our perspective and what we're sharing with the legislature today. Let's see. The other program I wanted to highlight, and Sarah mentioned this in the intro, is the New York State Environmental Protection Fund. And I'm assuming a lot of folks are familiar with this one. It's been around since 1993, invested billions of dollars. And really, one of the great things about it is like every single community throughout New York State has benefited from the EPF throughout the course of its existence. And it really supports a very wide range of programs that protect our land, air, and water, connect people with nature, protect wildlife, support sustainable economic development. And I have a whole list of things here. This is not comprehensive. And you may be familiar with this sign here in the middle of this. Several years back, the legislation was passed by the legislature that, that requires when you do implement an EPF project that you have to put one of these signs up. So I think the public is getting a better understanding of just how significant, you probably have see these signs up, how significant these investments are and how much of an impact they're making in our communities. As I said before, EPF and all these programs that it supports has been not only good for our environment and our health, but also good for our economy, supporting 350,000 jobs. Studies have shown that EPF-supported industries generated $40 billion of economic activity every year. And there's a big focus in the EPF for land preservation and water protection. And for every $1 we invest in that, we're getting $7 in economic benefits returned to the state. So one of those win-win situations, everybody supports it. It's very, very popular, similar to the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, consistently oversubscribed, not enough resources to meet the needs. So we're continuing working to push up the amount of funding going into this really important program. So quick snapshot of where we are in New York State. This session, the executive budget, as Sarah mentioned, is proposed at 425. That matches the all-time high that has been the last couple of years. And again, if you had asked me 6 months ago if I thought we were going to, if we were going to be at 425, I would have said probably not. But given the kind of the shift in where the state's finances, 425 is something that we're very supportive of. For those in the weeds on this, one really positive thing is that the governor did not try to take any of that money, which is specifically supposed to be for those types of projects I listed before, and use that to fund agency staffing, like at the DEC. Um, that's something that's come up in past years. And while we strongly support agency staff, we can't do a lot of this work without agency, and we consistently fight for more agency staff. Taking it out of this pot of funding, which is intended specifically for projects, is not the way to go, in our opinion. So we fought back with that with the legislature in previous years, but thankfully, that was not included in the governor's proposal this year. I will say, as a side note, in the governor's executive budget, she did propose an additional 45 full-time staff at the DEC this year. And it's a good thing because in recent years, we know we've had lower staff levels at DEC than we've had in the decades previous. And it's difficult to do the work, the enforcement, and the new policies and new programs without robust DEC staffing. So a positive step. Certainly, probably not enough staff that we need to achieve everything we're looking to achieve in New York State, but a step in the right direction with 45 new staff. But back to the EPF, uh, we are pushing and supporting maintaining the fund at $425 million in the final budget. There's a lot of advocacy going on, highlighting the success of the program, the continued needs. There's a lobby day coming up in Albany on February 10th. I encourage folks, if you're supportive of EPF programs, to consider attending. I can provide more information on that as well. So that's what we're working for this year. But in the future years, as I've said before, there's not enough resources to meet the needs. So we're continuing to push for at least 500 million in the years ahead. But again, focusing on that 425 this year. We did want to highlight, and I did want to highlight one energy related funding issue, and that's the Sustainable Future Program. You may have heard about last year, Governor Hochul initiated this Sustainable Future Program, which was the largest single in climate related investment in the state's history, $1 billion. And it goes into a host of different things. Essentially, it's really investments needed to meet our goals under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, driving renewable energy development forward. So that program started last year, and as I understand it, much of that $1 billion is either being spent or potentially soon to be dedicated to specific programs and projects. While it was initially billed as a 5-year program, the funding is largely allocated. So that's why we're very concerned that the governor in her executive budget proposal did not include any more money for the Sustainable Future Program in her executive budget. We're working with the legislature to hopefully add that money back in and do throughout the budget process. As I said before, this is very, very important in terms of doing the work we need to do to implement the CLCPA, and really is a down payment for a long-term sustainable funding mechanism. And that would be an emerging cap and invest program that the state is calling the Clean Air Initiative, which would generate, and that's putting a cost on pollutants on and then reinvesting that in climate related projects, would generate $3 billion a year. But that is running behind. It's not up and going yet. So in the interim, we feel like it's prudent to continue to invest in the Sustainable Future Program. And I do want to take a quick look at the federal side. And I know, I think I could spend an entire webinar speaking about kind of the gloom and doom that's been going on on the federal level, because quite frankly, it's been rough. It's been a tough year with the new administration, and back in March, the EPA announced 31 rollbacks of long-standing environmental regulations on everything from climate to drinking water and toxics and many other things. So EPA is taking major steps backward. We're seeing funding cuts. The big what I call the big ugly bill, made significant cuts to clean energy funding. We're seeing cuts to agency staff, unfortunately. So there's funding cuts, there's regulatory rollbacks, um, also seeing halting on clean energy projects. We look at the offshore wind projects happening off the coast in New York, and other states in the Northeast. There was an arbitrary, illegal, ultimately, you know, blanket stop on permits for all wind, offshore and land-based wind that was overturned in the courts. But as soon as that was overturned, the president took action to then halt the 5 offshore wind projects for so-called national security concerns. Um, the developers have been fighting that in court and successfully. And some of the projects have been coming back, the construction's going back online, but just very frustrating to see that we have these projects that were permitted moving forward under construction, just halted. But all that being said, there's a lot of frustration on the federal level. We are seeing some successes, and particularly as it relates, I think that this group is very interested in clean water funding. In particular, well, just to talk about the importance of clean water funding, um, in recent years, in the last many decades, we've seen the share of the federal government's investment in water infrastructure going down. 63% of our water infrastructure needs were met by the federal government in 1977. 2017, that went down to 9%. So that pushes a lot of the burden onto state and local ratepayers, which is what we're continuing to work on. But the federal funding that remains very, very important to states like New York. In particular, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the drinking water program, as it sounds like it invests in drinking water infrastructure, and the Clean Water program helps support upgrades to our wastewater treatment and operations. Those are essential. They not only sometimes they can provide grants, but largely, as it sounds, a state revolving fund. The funding goes to states. Local governments get either low interest or zero interest loans, and when they pay that back, the money gets revolved and circulated back and funds other projects. So really, really important program. But then this administration, when they came in, President proposed in the beginning of the year a 90% cut approximately to both the clean water and drinking water SRF programs. The House then followed up with a proposal to cut about 25% of both of those programs. And again, these programs are already underfunded. They're already far less than what we used to get from the federal government. We can't afford further cuts. We, in fact, could very much use significant increases to these programs. So moving in the wrong direction is very, very problematic. But I will say that with some really, really strong advocacy from not just the environmental community, but states and local governments pushing back on these cuts, the labor groups pushing back as well. There was some success where we ultimately landed. The recently passed congressional budget included no cuts to the SRF programs from last year. And in this kind of federal landscape that we're in right now, if you have an environmental program and you remain flat, that's a major victory. So that's where the House and the Senate agreed and recently passed a budget that would maintain funding at the same level as 2025. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, another good example, a program that's been extremely successful in a comprehensive restoration program for the health of the Great Lakes. And in the last Trump administration, there were attempts to cut it by anywhere from 50 to 90%. That was not the case with his executive budget proposal this year, but it has been an issue in the past. But ultimately, the House and Senate agreed to pass an EPA budget that provided actually a $1 million increase from $368 million to $369 million. And again, if a flat, even maintaining funding is a victory, a $1 million increase is like we were jumping for joy. So some great success on the clean water side. And there's a lot that went into this, as I said before. But one important takeaway I have to say, especially for this group, is that clean water protection is absolutely a winning issue. We see it time and time again. Um, there is so much support for clean water on a bipartisan basis. Every time we see polling, clean water protection always is at the top. And when we're working again with whether it be Democrats, Republicans, we consistently have strong support for clean water programs, and that includes the SRF, that includes the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So, we need to continue to lean into that and, put when we're working on these issues, stressing the importance of clean water, stressing the importance of clean drinking water, working on both sides of the aisle. We can see success with these programs to protect and fund clean water protection. So a bit of positive news in a kind of in a rough federal landscape when it comes to environmental protection. Yeah, so that's kind of an overview. Welcome any questions.